We will be interviewing Miss Singleton today from Oakely Elementary School. And pull up a chair, grab a cup of coffee, because you are in for a treat. This is one teacher that students line up to get into her class. So we look forward to hearing all about this Buck Institute for Education certified PBL educator who just came back from Napa Valley, by the way, which I am so envious. I would love to have gone and participated in it. So we are just so blessed to have her wealth of knowledge with us today. So our format is going to be, we'll be asking her 5 questions and she'll briefly answer them. And we're looking at the interview being 15 to 20 minutes or so. So the first question is, let's just start off. If you will share with us what you teach and a little bit about your background, because I know you wear lots of hats at Oakely Elementary. So tell us what you teach and what it is that you do with project-based learning there.
Okay. Again, my name is Nefertiti Singleton. I am a graduate of Fulton County Schools. I am a contributor in a lot of different ways. It's where I live, it's where my daughter attends school, and the school that I've actually gone to as well. I am a graduate of West Georgia, as well as Kennesaw State University, as well as Lincoln Memorial. So I've got a little background there. Entering my 15th year teaching, and I am entering my 2nd year as a project-based learning lab teacher at Oakely Elementary School. I have been teaching majority upper grades, but now I teach all grades, K through 5. And through this program, students generally come to me and do an extensive project where they learn PBL principles and how to become a more versed learner, where they pulling in the 21st century learning skills, the 4 C's: creativity, collaboration, communication, and critical thinking. So I just capitalize on those so that students can have a broadened sense of the world that they live in.
Awesome. And I've had the pleasure of visiting your classroom and actually observing a class in action. And I just wanted to stay all day. It was such a treat. And I got to see a couple or hear about some of your entry events. And I know through our online discussions, several teachers have said, you know, what are some great ideas of entry events that we've looked at, some that are over the top. But I know that yours are awesome and practical and very doable. So will you share some of the entry events with us?
Yes. A lot of the entry events, I feel like once you know what the project is and what your driving question is, your entry event can be as large scale or as small scale as you want it to be. For me, it had to be small scale because I'm on the limited resources, financially and personnel wise and supplies wise, with this being my first year. So a lot of the entry events, I pulled on either people that I know, so community members, stakeholders. I tried to really find the wealth that was right there in our community. So sometimes there would be speakers that would come in to start a project. Sometimes I would pull just resources offline, whether it was just a Kahoot game or a quiz game, or it was something with the lower kids where we actually did a pin the tail on a donkey, like something that just would get them ready to do the work and get them excited to figure out what gears and what shiftings we would make along the way. I've also done virtual field trips for entry events. I've had some people come in and, like, I had a stewardess friend that come in and start on a event that I did with kindergartners where they were doing Christmas around the world. So it's just kind of pulling all the different things that you have, but entry events don't have to be all extraneous. It can be something that's just going to really hook them in and make them want to understand what's going on. It could be a provocative reading. It can be a poem. It can be a song. It can be a video, a music video. With first graders, we were doing a fitness project, and I played the Beyonce Move Your Body video, and we did a workout as our entry event. So it was just something to hook them and make them want to draw into what the project was asking them to do.
Awesome. And I remember you telling us a little bit about some anticipation that you had with posting things in the hallway. And that was so beneficial. And it had really had the wow factor, but yet it was something so obtainable for a teacher to do.
Very much so.
Will you share what you did with that?
With 3rd through 5th graders last year, for second semester, we did a Black History series. And so the months that I met with them were January through March. And basically the week before we came back from the Christmas break, all I did was get a printout of famous African Americans, past and present, and I placed them around the building. We have a 2-story building, and so 3rd through 5th grade is upstairs. And so along with their picture was a tagline that said, "They're coming." And that was all. There was no other information. And so at this point, and I did it without them seeing me putting it up. So they came to school and were welcome with it. And so just to kind of, because I have monitoring stations for the morning. So just to kind of see the kids walking around, looking at the posters, trying to understand what it was about, and then how they were generating conversation around it was priceless. So they were like, wait a minute, how are they coming? This person isn't even alive. Like, what is going on? So it was just really cool. And so when they came to class and started to see some of the same pictures inside my classroom, they were like, oh, it was you. So it was cool just to kind of see how they were going to figure out the puzzle of how we were going to start that series.
And it's awesome because I think about creating a culture of innovation and inquiry. And you did that without really saying anything, because they just started asking those questions. So they came in already wanting to know.
They
and
did.
If you don't mind sharing one more about the exercise, I think you had a friend come in and do that as your entry event.
Yes. The kindergartners who did the holidays around the world, she was a stewardess at an airline, and the students came in to the classroom looking like a airplane, like they were going to go on a trip. So all of my chairs and benches were set up to look like they had to come in and have a seat. So once they came in, they were given a passport and they were given some wings along the way for the students that were listening and paying attention. And she basically welcomed them in the classroom, went through the whole protocol of Oakely flight 2015 at the time, moving on to our first location, which was New York City. And she just went through the whole protocol of how to buckle your seatbelts, how to be safe on the aircraft, things that they needed to know along the way. And she actually was dressed in her stewardess uniform. So it was just really cool. They had no clue. They were like, who is this lady? Because I didn't say anything. And so she came in and welcomed them, and they were totally intrigued. So it from that point, they felt like every week that somebody was going to come and meet them. And so I had to explain that was our entry, that we would be learning things every week, but that I was certainly happy that they were hooked at that point to want to start the process.
Absolutely. And your entry events are stimulating, eye-catching, and it really hooks your students. And 99% of your students love to be in your class. But we always know that there's one. There's always a reluctant learner. Can you share with us some of your tips or tricks that you use to get those learners on board with the PBL process?
My position was interesting because I service all the students K through 5. I had to learn a lot of new faces, a lot of new names, because I was primarily intermediate students. My 4th and 5th graders were used to me. They had seen me all the time, and because our building is so large, we have over 800 students that we service. So I went from seeing 30 to 50 kids a day to so many, depending on what the rotation schedule was like. So what I did for each of my students that came to class, the very first day, we just like a regular teacher would, to set the expectations, set the parameters, classroom management, that whole kind of thing. But then we talked about PBL management and what it meant and what it was going to look like once they came to our class and how it would be a little bit different. But I also had an opportunity for every kid in the school to do a multiple intelligence test. the 3rd through 5th graders did it online, and it basically highlighted all of their modalities. So I knew what type of learner they were, because I only saw them for a limited time. I needed something to go off of. And then for my K2 students, their modality assessment wasn't online. It was a paper pencil, but it was using pictures to show me how they like to learn. So for the reluctant learners, I just went back to their profiles and tried to figure out what interest did they have. And so those will become talking pieces, because I feel like in PBL, you just have to build relationships with the students. And once they know that you care, and once they know that you're on board with doing something different, then I didn't have a lot of pushback. And some of the things that I encountered may have been behavioral things that happened that stemmed from the classroom, not necessarily that came in with me, but once they got into the lab, which was an experience in itself, because Nisa knows everything's on wheels in the lab. So if anything, they just wanted to come in and spin around in the chairs. So I didn't have a whole lot of problems. So, I would say, okay, well, we're not going to be able to sit in the chairs today if we can't get on task, that kind of thing. And, just try to see where I could tap into something that they were interested in from the assessments that I gave them for the multiple intelligences. And I used that for differentiation. That was how I put their groups together. And so they were starting to learn that they had way more in common with some people that they never even talked to or were friends with in their own classrooms. Mm-hmm. So where there wasn't a one size fit all for every kid, I did try to figure out what I could do to form a relationship with the kids that were a little more reluctant to get on board.
What a great idea to do a needs-based checkpoint and then derive the instruction around that. And I know the question is going to be, where did you get those tests? And are they free? Is that a subscription that Fulton has purchased?
Actually, no, it's online. Prior to my being a PBL teacher, I was an Inspired Classroom teacher for 6 years. And so I also am the coach for the Inspired Classroom teachers here at my school as well. And it's basically the Inspire model is where you bring a lot of the technology into to the students so that they are readily accessible to be able to do what they need without you having to be the only one that gives them that knowledge. And so with that being known, once I started this about 6 years ago in a training that I actually got from the county, there was another teacher that said that she used this online assessment. And from there, as teachers, we beg, borrow, and steal. So it became just a regular practice that I did with my students every year. And so I decided to do it. But you can simply Google Birmingham multiple intelligence test. And if you have my website, it is actually on my website. If you pull up my website for project-based learning, it is under the section, I think the need to know section. But there's actually two versions. There's a K2 version and there's a 3.5 version. The K2 version is a little, the wording is a little bit differently than the 3.5 version. But they both are used. So on my website, it's on the right hand side. It says multiple intelligence test primary and then multiple intelligence test 3.5. So those are there. They're totally free. You can Google it and find it. You don't have to find it from my website, but you just simply answer the questions and it tabulates a circular grid that gives you all 8 intelligences on a varied color scheme. So the one that has the most color is the one that you are most functioning at, depending on how you answer the questions. So that the students need to be, have enough time to really answer the questions correctly. So they're not just clicking on anything because it won't come out right. But that's pretty much, how it works. And I've encouraged the teachers to take it too. I mean, they need to kind of know what their modalities are in their different intelligence that kind of help thrive how they like to teach and learn as well. So just let that not be a secret. But that was what I used for 3.5. I actually didn't even do the K2 version online because I wanted to in my first year, I didn't know how savvy they would be. All of them going online to take the assessment. 3-5, I felt confident. I wasn't as sure for K2, so I found a online just a paper copy of the same type of assessments, but it was actually like 4 questions, but there were pictures on there. So I literally read it to my kindergartners and any first or second graders that, you know, that just needed to help understand what they needed to do. And they just circled what they liked. So, and I Googled this one as well. I think the title was How I Learn Best. I think that may have been the title. Nisa, I can get that to you. Both, I can send you both links as well. But they were super easy, and so from there, all I did from the paper copies, I just categorized. You know what people like to work alone. Those are our individualists. The kids that like to work in partners, and the kids that liked working in groups. And then there were like questions like, well, do you like books or puzzles or, you know, movies or videos or music? And so it helped me understand what type of learner they were, you know, whether they were a musical learner or auditory learner or a visual learner, or, you know, so I was able to kind of match the kids that had like minds together to produce some of their project teams.
Excellent. And I really like the idea that you encourage teachers to take it too. I think that's important. And I will, for my class, put the links next to this particular video for those resources too. So the class will have them. So moving with our next question, thinking about PBL gets me a little bit nervous because of the classroom management. But you have it down to a science as far as your movies for the tables, where they go, each table having what they need. And I really liked your anchor charts. And one anchor chart in particular, and I think this ties in with what you just mentioned about finding your students' strengths, were the jobs and the roles that they had. And I love that you say sometimes you let them pick, sometimes you kind of guide and assign. And then sometimes if they get upset about a role that they've had, you kind of coach them about, hey, maybe it's something you're really going to like because you don't know. So can you kind of speak to what those roles are, and then how you handle that child that says, well, I didn't want to do that role, and how you move to be a coach with that child?
Well, first semester when I first started, I used the multiple intelligence test to put their project teams together. And I didn't, they didn't have a say. It was what I was used to doing as a teacher. And what I'm learning in PBL is a lot of trial and error. So I'm a very reflective person by nature. So I like to know what they're getting, what they're not getting, and what they're understanding, and what they liked and didn't like. And so at the end of the first semester, I took a reflection, and a lot of the students, it was actually a paper pencil reflection at this point, but a lot of the students were very candid and honest about what they felt about how their teams were put together. And where there were students that were very, that enjoyed who they worked with, there were other students that felt as if some of the people spoke over them, or they didn't have an opportunity to share as much or give as much or contribute in the way that they wanted to. And so I wanted to figure out how I could curtail some of that. So we had our PBL coach at the time, well, our KSU coach at the time, Miss Samaya Knight. We did some brainstorming. We tried to figure out, well, what other opportunities? And I'm not far-fetched from having roles and jobs, that kind of thing, but I didn't think that would be a part of this at that time, because our time was so limited. I was like, I don't have time for them to figure out who they want to work with. And so she was like, well, let's just come up with some jobs, and then we can kind of go from there. So even if it wasn't them figuring out, them taking on the role at that moment, they could tap into it at some point. So we decided to come up with 4 jobs. And because generally their project teams are between 4 and 5 people. I try to make them as around that, because it gets to be too much when it's too many. So the 4 jobs were project manager, and this was the overseer of the group. And then basically they help with the organization. They would be a point person for me if someone was missing from the time that we met before, and they would kind of fill them in so I didn't have to.
Your boxes, please set the dolly outside of your classroom so the next person can use it. Again, if you're finished using the dolly, you you're done with it, sit it outside of your classroom so the next person can use it. Thank you.
Back to work. So the project manager was a go-to for me, that just kind of helped manage everything that was going on at the table. And so then we had a tech, the tech engineer. And so this would be a person that I would pull small groups, each of the tech people from each of the teams, and I would teach them a tech tool that we were using either for presentation purposes or for gathering information. And I would have them disseminate to their teams as opposed to me having to do everything whole group. And so that was a tech engineer. So that was pretty much a tech savvy person from the group. And then there was a research expert. And this person would also kind of do what the tech person did, but solely on the research tools. So when we're in our research part of our project, I would front load them with accurate databases to go from, not just Google. They wanted to Google everything. Mm-hmm. So just finding databases for them to go through, Discovery Net, Discovery Kids, and all these other places that they could find information. And so they would disseminate as well. And then lastly, we had a time monitor because our time was precious, because all I got to see with them was 50 minutes a week. And so this time monitor would keep the team running and rolling so that we could give them updates of how much time they had to work on the different things that they had to work on. And so second semester, I did give them an opportunity to choose for themselves what who they wanted to work with and what job they wanted. So just very different in my own little experiment so that I could kind of see how to work through that if it didn't go over well and what to do next, because we don't know unless we try. We shy away from a lot of things, and because sometimes teachers don't have that kind of time in class to dedicate to it, I thought I would, just to kind of figure out what it looked like. And so for most classes, it actually worked seamless. The students knew that even if it was their friend, that maybe they shouldn't work with them because they wouldn't get as much done. They were really close with some of them. And so, they were like, well, we're going to talk too much. And so they made those decisions on their own. And because I talked to them about what it looked like when you had to be in a professional project team and how everyone had to make sure they were fulfilling their roles. And if it was someone that you were too close to and maybe not being able to get on task with, and maybe that didn't need to be the person in your project team, but that didn't have anything to do with your friendships. So we talked about that kind of thing. And for once they actually got with their groups and decided on their jobs, they had rich conversations about, okay, well, I know generally in class, I'm the one that the teacher calls on to do things with the Promethean board, active board, or I'm the one the teacher calls on to go and find things online. And so they wanted to talk about what their strengths were and what they did. Well, I know I'm a good organizer. All my stuff is together in my desk, so those are conversations. And when they decided, okay, this is what I'm good at, for most groups, they were able to equitably say, this is what I think I'll do best at. And they made a decision, and it worked. But for some groups, it wasn't as cut and clear. So if it meant that two people wanted the same job, then I always told them that I had the bottom line, regardless of what they felt, their teachers and I, because the teachers knew them a little bit more than me. If at the end of the day, they couldn't bring it together, the teachers and I had the final say. And so for a couple groups we had to just say, look, let's kind of come up with an equitable way to figure this out. And if it still doesn't work, then we're just going to have to assign a role because they have to get done. And then for the people that didn't feel like their role was best for them, actually ended up doing very well because they don't know what they don't know until they do it. And so that's something we just had to figure out. So it's worked in both ways, but it's a lot of give and take on both sides. Mm-hmm. And so when the students aren't offered the opportunities to kind of decide, then they don't know. And so that, from my little experiment, it worked better than it did.
And what a great way to show growth mindset as the students are in their roles and then doing some self-reflection and saying, mm-hmm. I don't want to work with this person. We're too close. We don't work well. Mm-hmm. Or this job, I'm an organized person, so this role would suit me best. So there's a lot of maturity and growth that happens through authentic learning through PBL.
And then at the end of that semester, at the end of that time when they took their PBL evaluations, they were way better in the teaming portion than it was in the first semester. So some things had actually progressed forward. And so that was the big ticket for me.
That is great. And then our last question is to kind of wrap up. John Larmer at the Buck Institute talks about light PBL and PBL projects that are kind of shorter in length. And so as my group gets started in doing PBL for the first time, what are some takeaway nuggets of wisdom that you can leave with them as starting out?
I actually read that article, and it was enlightening as far as another take of PBL Light was basically the spin on some people getting generated projects from just other areas that didn't holistically speak to the PBL model. So he was kind of making sure that whether you do a shortened project or a project that just making sure that all components are in it. I feel like the PBL process in itself is a whirlwind. It's a lot. It's a lot to start with. And so starting with shorter projects it's a good way to get the mindset changed. But let's not be let's not fall for the counterfeit, because sometimes projects can say PBL but don't have the principles that are aligned to it, so the students get the most out of it. And that is what I'm finding, that when I do a lot of research on trying to find projects that would be the best for a particular group of students, just trying to figure out, well, what underlying and woven skills that are in there that will really speak to the PBL model. So I definitely would say making sure that clearly all projects are standards based, and making sure that you can just go beyond and push the envelope just a little past what they would be getting in the classroom. Looking at a more global aspect of it has helped me just to kind of see, okay, if we're talking about geometry in math, then what kind of project could I create that would allow them to use a mindset that goes beyond the classroom? So how is geometry used in structures around the world? How is geometry used in things in their community that they would not have looked at otherwise? So how do we bring that in? So I think for me, just finding ways to bridge the real world piece to what they were learning in class, so what they learn isn't in isolation.
Yeah.
And so not necessarily biting off more than you can chew. If a project is going to last a month, or even one good project could last a semester if it has to, because you want to be able to really make it fit into the whole genre of a project-based learning project and not just a traditional project. You know, I tell a lot of the teachers that I've done professional development with is that your projects can start the same day that your unit starts. It's not a separate entity. It's not that other thing to do. If you can plan it to really flow like the unit flows, even once the unit is over and the project isn't, you can still keep it moving, but the students can have more free reign to kind of work on pacing and flexibility as long as you guide them along in the process. So I would say find one project that maybe it was even a traditional project that you love. Every teacher has a project they love to do in their class, and then try to figure out what PBL components can you add to that project, so you don't have to start from scratch. And most projects, if you at least just do it in the class with them, as opposed to sending it home after you've learned the material, that's the hugest piece right there. You know, walking them through the process, and it's starting with the driving question that is very much thought-provoking, and that's going to extend them to have to get it beyond typing in an answer in Google. Those type of things you want to be very cognizant about. And then just making sure that you pull in whatever you can through these entry events and through people coming in to speak to them if you can't go on field trips and things of that nature. It's just the added piece that makes it a PBL project. And then giving them the opportunity to present to somebody beyond you. That public product piece is huge. My students were not used to seeing anybody outside of who was standing right in front of them all the time. So even when they had to go and present, my students presented to business partners, they presented to our administrative team, they presented to other students not in their grade levels, they presented to other teachers that were on other platforms, they presented to our custodial staff, they presented to our lunch staff, they presented to whomever would listen to them. And they needed that because they came and had some really big reflective pieces on, I'm not as good at this as I thought. I seem to be very comfortable in front of my peers, but when I had to go and speak to somebody and sell somebody something I've never seen, that became interesting. But without the exposure, they wouldn't have even thought about it, you know, but then having the feedback and the criticism from the people that they presented to was valuable as well. When they were able to walk away with a form that said, this is what I think you did well in, and these are areas that I challenge you in. And so now this second year, it's not a huge deal anymore. They know kind of how this is going to work. And now we got to move in our next steps to get that happen. So start small and get everything in, as opposed to starting huge and not being able to cover as much.
Mm-hmm. I love that you brought up every teacher has a project they love. So why not start with something you're already familiar and then add and make sure you're hitting all of the key PBL components that we talked about in the online class.
Very much so.
And I love the fact too that you're practical, you're reasonable with expectations, and yet it's flourishing in your classroom. So it's showing that you don't have to go over the top on every single project, that it can be manageable. And I'm actually going to share the link to her website so you all will be able to see all these really cool projects that she's done. But I learned something every time we talk. So I loved talking with you, and thank you for meeting with us today.
You're very welcome.
And we look forward to being in touch here in the near future. So thank you, Ms. Singleton.
You're very welcome, guys. Have a great and amazing year. And I am a resource, so reach out if you need to.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.